we've had a couple of innovations at Bay Planning, at the Bay Planning Coalition. I want to mention two of those. One of them is we have a whole set of new committees at Bay Planning. They're on page 34 of your program. And one of our committees that's new is the Organizational Development Committee, led by Laura Kennedy. And the whole purpose of the Organizational Development Committee is to look at the internal workings of the Bay Planning Coalition on behalf of our members and our industries. And we did something for I think it's our third year. We had a strategic planning retreat in October of this year under the guidance of John Coleman, our president David Ivester, and with the excellent support of Saxon Hamilton, Roger Bush, who's here today watching us and keeping us on target. We began to identify needs and gaps in our thinking. How does Bay Planning serve its members? How does it move forward? And one of the things we recognize is that there's going to be a need, there actually is a need, to develop the next generation of stewards for our industry, advocates and stewards for our industry. In fact, we even thought about calling this conference, which used to be called the Decision Makers Conference, the Future Decision Makers Conference. But we certainly recognize there's a need for all of us in our region to cultivate that next generation. And we made a commitment in our strategic plan to do something about that. So we're beginning that process. Today's presentation is an example of that. Our next presenter is a cadet at the Cal Maritime Academy, which is located in Vallejo. His name is Kevin Prochnow. He is a Coast Guard Petty Officer, third-class bosun's mate, and he's going to be finishing his degree in the fall at Cal Maritime. And Kevin is an example of a rising leader in our industry who understands both the needs of the maritime industry to continue to grow, but to do so in a sustainable way. So we're looking forward to Kevin's presentation. He's going to be presenting on the research that he's conducted on the impacts of microplastic contamination in San Francisco Bay. So please give a big welcome to Kevin Prochnow.
Hello, how are you? I'm Kevin. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking about microplastic contamination. Now, I'm sure some people are aware of it. They're either really aware of like the microbeads, or they aren't really familiar with it at all. But I think that with the recent pass of Assembly Bill 888, which I'll be going into, that it sparks that it's an emerging issue, and I think it's important that there needs to be more transparency on the topic, because based upon my research, I found that there's a lot of really interesting information that I feel like is really important to be aware of as for a future thing that at least my generation will probably have to deal with. So I'm going to be going over the research that I found, what studies, and what's going on globally, and what has been found in the now in San Francisco with this microplastic issue. So what is a microplastic? Well, it's micro, so it's small, but the exact really definition of it is it's any of the plastic particle that's less than 5 millimeters in dimension. To give you kind of an idea, it's that big. See, pretty small. But now the source of these microplastics, it's a pretty big range. It's everything from the breaking down of bigger plastics that get in the ocean, to the synthetics from our clothes, to even things that you can't even imagine, things just breaking off of your car every day, or things washing to a stream, or things that are just old. Let's see. Now, to give you an idea of like, where are these microplastics? Like, is this just something around here? But no, it's not. Now, if you take a look at that map on the screen right now, just give you like a global projection of it. Every single orange dot you're looking at right now is a place where microplastics have been found in a study. And the source of this is Adventure Science, and I highly encourage you to go online and just take a look. North America, and you can especially look over in the Atlantic. You see that dark orange line right there, and then you get up closer. You can see the actual cities and towns, San Francisco being one of them, and Southern California. It's all over the place, Lake Erie to the Chesapeake. And I'll go into that more. So to kind of give you a timeline on this, it was really discovered in the 1970s. Researchers started finding in the bivalvia, or the mollusks and stuff, in their ingestion, they were, in their stomachs, they were processing these little plastic fragmentations, and that's where they really started to discover them. And then in the deep sea sediments odyssey of 2001, they found microplastics in benthic mud in the bottom of the ocean floor in the deepest parts of the Atlantic, which kind of, I think that's really crazy to think about. I mean, we know about the Pacific gyres. We know about those big garbage patches out in the ocean, but you know, you're finding out that they're not just at the surface or maybe a mile down in the water column. They're making their way all the way to the bottom. So we do know that microplastics do get into sediment. And the deep sea example isn't the only example of that, but there's no telling how far down they can go. And as years went on, we also found out that the Chesapeake and the 4 estuaries that lead into it had high densities of microplastics, specifically at the surface water. And then Lake Erie was even higher. But then in 2015, Dr. Rebecca Sutton from San Francisco Estuary Institute had found in her preliminary results of her surface water investigation on microplastics that we had, in some places, 3 times higher than the concentrations of microplastics than Lake Erie or the Chesapeake. One thing about that study, the sites that they went to were all wastewater treatment facilities, discharges. And why is that important is because, like I was telling you, the synthetic fibers from your clothes, there's no cost-effective solution as of now for them to be able to treat all those synthetic fibers that are coming through our washing machines. So I think it was good to be able to get an idea of, you know, maybe how much synthetic fibers are being pushed out and how much of that, what percentage of that density is what. But I think for future studies, I think we need to not just look at the wastewater treatment plants, but also look into other places where there's runoffs. Because that's one of the issues with this topic is that it's not just any one source. It's coming from everywhere. But so 55% in that study was fragmentation. And like I was talking about, fragmentation had to do with the plastic bags, larger plastics breaking down in the classic way into smaller pieces. And then we found that 27% is synthetic fibers. And about 8% plus 8% is 16%, the foam and film. The foam and film is stuff like your to-go foam or or the film that goes around like DVDs or cigarette packages and things of that nature. And then the 2% is the pellet. So you see that pellet. The pellet is a generic term when you can't really determine if it's a microbead or if it's some other plastic particle. Most of the time they refer to it as spheres, but pellet really was kind of a term they were trying to use for being pretty sure that it's microbeads. So basically the concern with this is that you have toxins that are floating around in the water, and then you have these microplastics that are floating in there too. So when they come together though, these microplastics, there's evidence of them absorbing these toxins that are floating around the ocean, and they're using these microplastics as almost like a vehicle to transport throughout our water column and potentially into our food webs. And that's why I call it's kind of a new modality of pollution, because it's not that classic pollution that we typically think about. So if you take a look at this toxin chart, just to give you an idea of like what kind of major health effects can be caused by different absorbing toxins that are found in the water or have been found in microplastics, I think the one that that's important to look at is the PCBs. I'm not even going to attempt to say PCB. I know everyone just using the acronym. But yeah, liver failure, kidney failure, things of that nature. I mean, these are things we already know about. SFEI, our regional monitoring program, already studies these. The prey fish that are currently out there right now that they're monitoring that do have these toxins in them, like PCBs, they get into our food web and they're consumed by larger fish or larger animals, or even humans. I think it's safe to say that, but it's just a concern, a public health concern. And you've seen it before. If any of you guys go fishing, how many people go fishing in the Bay Area? 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay, not many. I'm surprised. Oh, anyway, so you've probably seen these charts then. These charts that are telling you that there's mercury and PCBs in these fish, and you need to limit the amount of fish that you intake from the bay, or even what you shouldn't even eat. So this is the concern that, I mean, we already know that there's fish that make us sick. But with these microbeads, what really needs to be determined is how much more sick can we get from consuming fish that have microbeads in their stomachs? Are they absorbing? Like there's all these questions that we don't know. And so what is the microbead? So I keep mentioning the microbead. So the microbead is the classic little plastic beads that are in like your discount personal hygiene products. Does anybody have microbeads that they know of in their products? No, one person. So maybe you don't know. Maybe you've never thought about it. They have them in toothpaste. If you use Colgate or some of the popular ones, they have them in facial scrubs and hand washing materials, body wash, you name it. Good luck going home tonight and taking a look at all the little microbeads. But I can show you one more time what they look like. Yeah. All right, don't forget. But I want to remind you, in that preliminary study, only 2% of the microplastic contamination issue so far that we found was microbeads. You look, from what we know so far, it's fragmentation. So there's 3 specific places that I want to point out that we're finding this. We're finding in the Tamara estuary, in the English Channel, they're finding microplastics in the stomachs of prey fish and larger fish. And then a really important one I want to point out is Dr. Chelsea Rockman's study, I think it was in 2014, on the fish that we purchase now, like off Half Moon Bay, that we consume. And she did a study where it compared between the fish in Indonesia that we buy to eat and the local fish that we eat right off Half Moon Bay. Scary, 67% of the fish species that they tested actually had microplastics. And these are fish that we're consuming. These aren't catch and release. These are seafood market fish. So what's important about that is we don't know a lot. I mean, we all like to know what we're eating. I mean, I'm sure there's probably a lot of people in here that prefer organic or non-genetically modified. We like to know what we eat nowadays, especially in this area. But we don't know what we're consuming as far as like our fish and microplastics. And that's why I think it's important to investigate further. You know, what is it that we're putting into our bodies? How is it affecting us? If there's microplastics, you know, this new modality I'm talking about of pollution and microplastics absorbing PCBs and they're in our fish that we eat, that concerns me. Now I want to use an example of the St. Lawrence River over in Canada, because I feel like this should be our next approach in the Bay Area. As far as how microplastics can impact dredging. So the St. Lawrence River is pretty similar to a lot of the rivers that feed into our San Francisco estuary over in Canada. And they found in different areas of that river, there was either really high concentrations of microplastics or there were none at all. But their method of looking through the river and examining where those key points are where this runoff was getting into the rivers and eventually going into the mud and eventually into the estuary, I think that should be our next point of approach as a recommendation. We need to be looking at studying the rivers that feed into our bay and looking at, you know, how we can mitigate or reduce microplastics from there. rather than going straight into the Bay. I think we need to start small and work our way up to this issue, as long as investigate the public health matter. Now, what's already being done, the legislative action, if you're all familiar, Governor Jerry Brown passed or signed Assembly Bill 888, which would ban microbeads to be sold in the state of California. And then President Obama signed a national microbead ban. But again, from what we know so far, in our area, what preliminary results have showed us that it potentially can only be a very small part of the problem. So my recommendations is reduction. But from what we know in the now, it's fragmentation. And that's why I support the stormwater traps that they have. They don't have them on all of them, but if you go online and you look at SFEI's RMP website, it talks about the $5 million grant that put these trash capture type nets that trap plastics all the way down to 5 millimeters in size. And I think that's key, is to continue to invest and get these grants to expand and put these types of stormwater traps on all our stormwater drains. Because if fragmentation is really the problem, I think that's what we need to attack. And I feel like that's a cost-effective solution. It's manageable. Whereas filtering out the synthetic fibers in wastewater treatment, it's just not there. And I don't think it's fair to push for that when it's still an emerging technology along with an emerging issue. Also, too, I want to recommend, we need to study the mud. If we study the mud, that'll tell us how our invertebrates are affected. It can tell us how our food web is being affected and can help us determine what future impacts microplastics could have in dredging. And I think right now it's just too early to make that determination. It's going to be regulated. There's no question of it. It's just the question of, is it 5 years? Is it going to be 10 years? Is it 15? The more that we know now and implement good faith measures will help, save cost and time in the future and give her a strong understanding of where our food chain and how humans are being impacted. And of course, there is the Clean Vessel Act and grant funding. If you go online to the BPC blog, you can take a look at our blog post about information about applying for public and private marinas to update their facilities and their sanitation systems and whatnot. And I feel like that is another really important good faith measure that can be implemented, and also revamp these public places, our marinas. And I think the most important is being self-aware of how you're contributing. I mean, we're all stewards of the Bay in here, whether we're directly involved or not. We're all a part of this community, and it's important that we be mindful. Are we putting microbeads or microplastics? I mean, a lot of us don't even know for sure if we have microbeads in our toothpaste. I didn't until I started learning about it. But I think it comes down to the self. And I want to show you, a lot of people will say that it's still too new, but I mean, this is becoming a popular topic. If you go on Google Trends, you can use any topic. You can take a look at how any topic is climbing in a search engine result. And you look right now, it's peaked, it's bumped up. It's higher than it's been since 2004. And these are all different key terms. And this is just nationally, this isn't even worldwide. And you can look nationally on Google Trends. You can see that there's states all around the country where this is becoming a rising public interest. You start seeing, I think search engines are great places to look to see what people are interested and what people are wanting to know more about. And I think it's, in my opinion, I feel like this is the interest in the general public is only going to continue to grow, especially if you're on social media. So I just want to thank the Bay Planning Coalition. I want to thank John. I want to thank Betty. I want to thank Jack. And I want to thank all the people, all of the members of the Bay Planning Coalition that have picked up the phone. I've called them or emailed them, and always wanting to give a hand. I think that is absolutely fantastic. And I can't thank you guys enough for this experience and what I've gotten to learn. I could talk for a couple of hours about this kind of stuff, but I appreciate the time. Thank you for listening, and thanks again. All right, well, I'm gonna open it. You guys can grill me with questions now. How does that sound?
Correct. If there are any questions as I'm walking over to do this, Kevin and I met with the US EPA, and they are going to be regulating this as an issue. And it's a matter of time, and it will impact all the industries in the Bay.
Thank you. When looking at the map of your distribution
Yes.
in the various ways around the world, it seemed like there were large circular clusters that were spread out. They weren't like linearly distributed. They kind of were linearly distributed, but you know, there was a whole bunch of little ones, and suddenly there'd be big ones. Do you know what's causing that effect?
Oh, so are you talking about specifically on that map, like why some are bigger and some are smaller? Is there any way we can go back to that photo? No? Okay. Well, anyway, so if you guys remember, the larger those circles, that meant the higher the concentration that they found. Either it was per kilometer squared or per meter squared. It depended on the range of distance. Most of those studies that I showed from Adventure Science are studying just surface water. Like, so when I started talking about mud and making that recommendation that we needed to know what's in our benthic mud, it's a pretty new field. Most of the research that's been done worldwide, which there's actually a ton of it. There's a lot more going on in the research going on in the rest of the world than in the U.S. You'll see most of it's all surface water, but they're now starting to get into looking at the mud. And I've just by looking at the trends and the direction that NGOs have been going and such, that's where the U.S. is starting to go too.
Are there any other questions? Yes, right back here.
Hi, thanks for your presentation. In the microplastics that, you know, it's been documented, they accumulate PCBs and other contaminants. In your literature search, did you find any research that talked about the desorption of those contaminants from the plastics into the flesh of the fish that are being consumed? Is there any research showing that it's getting into the part of the fish that we're consuming?
Actually, yeah, if you go online and you look at my references on that, specifically that one on the Tamara estuary, that's primarily what that study gets into. The only thing is that I wouldn't even attempt to like try and explain it because you kind of need to be like an endocrinologist to understand it. But yeah, I've noticed the UK or England, if you go on my references or my sources, yes, they do. That is something that they're starting to get into and learn more about. And I think that's critical for understanding what kind of public health risk the contamination is going to be.
Yeah, the EPA, when Kevin and I met with them, their thought process was that, as he described in his presentation, the carcinogens will bond to the plastic. The fish then consume the plastics. Then the carcinogens are within the fish, which eventually you and I are eating.
Oh, we have
Over here.
Kevin, just one question. Is there any information, I'm sure you can look it up online, but do you have anything for anybody here as far as who can ask for the grants and what it can be used for specifically? A couple examples.
Yeah, there's grants.gov, and there's also on my blog post on the website with the blogs, you'll be able to, I'll post the different sources and places that explain that. Also, San Francisco Estuary Institute also has posted online things like about the Clean Vessel Act, the Clean Vessel grants and stuff. So it's on the Bay Planning Coalition blog. One other thing too I want to say is I challenge all of you at some point to maybe when you're going to bed at night or whatever, just Google microplastics on your phone. Give it a Google, and it's astounding, like all the information that you're going to find on it that actually does exist, but it's just now trending, as you could see from Google Trends. Any other questions?
One thing, the PowerPoint presentation you saw is already on the Bay Planning Coalition website. So if you open that up right now, you'd be able to find the PowerPoint presentation. Kevin, thank you so much.
Thanks, John.